All right. Well, we are in security land again, and we have Dr. Jeremy Masler with us, the Maz. Fellow, you've seen him before. But welcome back to Channel 9.
Good to be here.
And we're all gonna have a conversation here with the special guest, Scott Field. Tell us about yourself. What do you do?
So I'm an architect in the security technology unit, and I've actually been working on security at Microsoft for about 12 years now, and
wow.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of changes. You know, back when I joined the development team, there were probably 20 people across development, test, and program management focused on security in the operating system. And today we have hundreds of people working on security. You know, that's certainly a huge change that we've seen there in terms of our priorities around security, and we've certainly seen a number of new threats and problems show up in the ecosystem that we've focused a lot of attention on. So I'm looking at security, and a lot of the recent focus is around protecting the operating system kernel.
Excellent.
That's been a huge focus area in Vista and also around the x64 platform. So that's my short-term, immediate focus right now.
So let's talk about that. I mean, it's sort of obvious to those of us in the know who kind of understand how operating systems work and etc. But for most people, why does it matter to lock down the kernel?
Yeah, so you can look at this from a number of different perspectives. So the first one, and the fairly obvious one to most people, would be that the kernel sits at the core of the system. So everything that the user does, you know, simple things like clicking on an icon, opening up a Word document, browsing to a website, all of those activities ultimately boil down to some operation occurring in the kernel. And actually, in many cases, many operations in the kernel. So everything you do that allocates a piece of memory is likely going to end up down in the kernel at some point in time. So everything is relying on the kernel. You know, that's an obvious good starting premise. The other way to look at this is from the perspective of the changing attack trends that we've seen. So if you go back a couple of years in time to a point where when you first started to see anti-spyware products show up on the market, we saw 3 or 4 products on the market probably 2 years back, and these products were responding to very specific new threats. So keyboard loggers, targeted marketing, some of these threats that arose from spyware were responded to by these relatively simplistic products. And those products actually, for the most part, operated in user mode. And what we saw happen really was several things. One was the attacks, because they were financially motivated, people were making a lot of money on these things, they evolved the attacks pretty quickly. And one of the big things we saw shift here was really an escalation in terms of this bad spyware moving from running in user space to running in kernel space. And what that allowed these guys to do was basically thwart these security products on the market. They were able to hide from view of these security products and pretty much take over the whole system. And they're able to do that because they're essentially tampering with the kernel and having the kernel lie about, you know, very basic operations that are occurring in the system. Like something like, tell me the contents of this directory. Well, the bad guy has patched those routines and changed them to return different results or to filter himself out of the list. So from that perspective, if the attacker gets control of the kernel, they can basically affect everything on the system. And this is a situation that we realized that if it continued, if it escalated, we could get to a point where these threats become so common, so pervasive, that dealing with them after the fact becomes very complex or very time-consuming for the end user, for example. So those are kind of 2 viewpoints on the kernel. So one is it's basically the basis of everything that happens in the system, if something goes wrong there, you're basically hosed. So that's one reason why we've focused a lot of energy in that area.
Okay.
So what's, I mean, from a typical end user standpoint, security concern might be, hey, I'm going to sit down at this computer, I'm going to log into my bank website or into my stock account website. I want to make sure that when I type in my password, it's going just to that website and no one else is able to sniff it. So from a security perspective, how do you enforce that and sort of reassure the user that the password's only going to that site that needs it?
Yeah, so this particular problem spans many parts of the system. So one, clearly if I go back to the kernel-oriented attacks, a bad guy in the kernel space has access potentially to the keyboard driver and all the state that relates to the keyboard. So that's another reason why we want to have some controls around the kernel. So in the absence of that solution, you have other things to worry about. So one is the trustworthiness of the application itself. Are you really running the web browser? Has the web browser been tampered with? What's the definition of the web browser? Is it just Internet Explorer.exe, or is it iExplorer.exe plus all of this additional code that's brought into the picture? So who really has access to it from the perspective of the application?
And just for those who don't know the architecture of Explorer, iExplorer.exe is actually a relatively small fraction of what we think of as the browser. Right? When you said extra files, you're talking about
Correct.
Uerelmon and
Correct. Yeah, iExplorer is almost a stub relative to the size of everything else that's brought in, let alone things like ActiveX controls, browser helper objects, and the like. So one thing that we have to understand is what is the application, what makes up the application that's actually handling this credential material that you're talking about. And we've actually done some work in Vista to help identify at least operating system components for starters. So everything that we ship in the operating system is digitally signed, and various actions in the system will take that into consideration. Things even like UAC elevation, when an elevation occurs, will tell the user about who the signer was behind that program. So identifying the program is one step, and then there are other activities such as identifying the flow of the credential material. So Windows Vista actually has a feature called the Credential Manager, which is a common API and UI framework for handling credentials. And there have actually been a number of improvements to that infrastructure for Vista that allow more trustworthy and predictable handling of credentials. So there's a common piece of UI that users would expect to see that's raised by the Credential Manager. There's also a mechanism that allows us to gather some credentials securely on the secure desktop as opposed to the desktop surface that users are interacting with normally.
Okay, all right, so last time I'm going to make a little list for myself of
Sure.
just things to dig into. UAC, Credman, Secure Desktop, these are all things we probably want to dig into.
Sure.
All right, so good, secure ways to get the credentials.
Yeah, so then of course another piece is where is the credential going? So you've typed it into the browser, assume you know that the browser is good, the browser hasn't been tampered with, and when I say the browser I mean the whole platform that defines the browser. Then you ask the question, where is the credential going when it hits the wire? Is it going to the wire over a secure protocol, for example? Is it going over SSL or not? And there are actually a lot of new controls in the browser that help users better handle credentials. And then of course there are situations like, is this really a banking site or not? So it's actually fairly straightforward for third parties to get SSL enabled certificates. They can bring up a website, and they could perhaps bring up a website that has a very similar name to a legitimate financial institution, but it really isn't legitimate. So that's another problem that we've looked at. And this has basically led to the evolution of certificate usage in the ecosystem. So we now have the notion of high assurance certificates